When I opened my eyes, I stared blankly at the zodiac calendar hanging on the wall. March 1997. Only 1 week left until my wedding with Ethan Hayes. The shock hit me like a tidal wave. I shot up from the bed and rushed to the mirror. Staring at my reflection, I was completely dumbfounded. My youthful face was untouched by exhaustion, my hands still soft and unscathed by years of housework. Trembling, I raised a hand to my chest, feeling my heart pounding. Overwhelmed, tears welled up and spilled over. I hadn't yet stepped into the prison of marriage. There was still time. Before I could fully process what was happening, I heard noise from the yard. It was Ethan Hayes. His face was filled with excitement as he held Olivia Carter's hands, his voice brimming with emotion. "Olivia, I will never let go of your hand again. Losing you made me realize how much I regret spending my life with someone I didn't love. It was pure agony. I don't want to wait until I'm 60 to finally understand. I want us to be together now. Let's call off the engagement." A wave of disbelief surged through me. My gaze was fixed on his youthful face outside the door, my entire body frozen. His words, his every expression, made one thing glaringly clear. Ethan Hayes had also been reborn. In my past life, he had been the one who cruelly removed my oxygen mask. Yet in front of everyone, he had acted devastated, playing the part of a grieving husband. The arriving doctors and nurses had tried to comfort him. "Professor Hayes, you and your wife spent so many years together. We know this decision wasn't easy. You just didn't want to see her suffer anymore. Please accept our condolences." "Yes," another nurse chimed in. "We all know how much you loved her. Life is long, you have to move forward." But only I knew. Ethan's tears were not from sorrow. He had only forced himself to look broken, putting on a show of unbearable grief as he staggered away, trying to maintain his image as a devoted husband and a respected professor. In reality, he could hardly wait to rush to the airport and bring back the woman he had loved all his life. Petals from the funeral flowers scattered onto the cold ground, crushed under his shoes, staining the floor with dark smudges, just like my absurd, tragic life. I had closed my eyes and let go completely, losing consciousness for the last time. That was my final thought before death claimed me. Now, reborn in this moment, I clenched my fists tightly. My parents saw me standing in the doorway in a daze, thinking I was heartbroken. My father's face darkened as he turned on Ethan Hayes, his voice laced with anger. "The Hayes family truly has no shame. Over the years, because of this marriage arrangement, we've done everything to support you. When your mother was gravely ill, wasn't it my wife and I who dragged a cart through the snow to rush her to the hospital? And now you're telling us you don't love Emma Sullivan anymore?" Ethan and I had been engaged since childhood, an arrangement set by my grandfather. The Hayes family was poor, barely making ends meet with borrowed money. Out of respect for the engagement, my parents had often stepped in to help them financially. Olivia Carter, standing beside Ethan, looked at him with pitiful eyes, her voice soft yet filled with sorrow. "Ethan, please don't let me come between you and Emma. Mr. Sullivan is right, you have to marry her. After all, her family has done so much for you. You owe them. No matter how much I love you, I have to let go." Her seemingly selfless words only made Ethan's gaze toward me grow colder, more filled with resentment. Just then, Mrs. Hayes rushed over, panting from exertion. She raised her hand, ready to strike him. "You ungrateful son. The Sullivan family has shown us nothing but kindness. Emma even saved my life. If you break off this engagement, we won't be able to hold our heads up in this town." But her hand, raised high, never fell. She was waiting for me to react the way I had in my past life, to rush forward and stop her out of love for Ethan. What a joke. If anything, I wished I could be the one to slap him myself. Since fate had given me a second chance, I would never be Ethan Hayes' devoted wife again. I would live for myself. Fine, I agreed to the annulment. The moment those words left my lips, not only Ethan but everyone around us froze. The entire street knew I had loved Ethan Hayes since childhood. How could I let go so easily? Ethan stared at me in disbelief. "Emma, are you really willing to call off our engagement?" I scoffed. "Of course not." Hearing that, Olivia Carter quickly turned away, her eyes welling up with fake tears. "If Emma refuses to let you go, then I won't stand in the way. For your future, Ethan, I'll step aside. We should part ways." Ethan's heart ached as he pulled her into his arms. Ethan turned back to look at me, his expression shifting into one of impatience, as if my reaction was exactly what he had expected. But before he could say anything, I continued. So, you need to pay back the money. His face stiffened. All these years, my family has spent a lot on yours, both inside and out. And that was all because of our engagement. Now that you want to break it off, you should at least settle the debt. Ethan had clearly never expected me to ask him for money. After all, in his mind, I was someone who would have gladly handed him money if he so much as hinted at needing it. His first instinct was to assume that this was my way of holding on to him, trying to force him into a corner with money. Annoyance flickered across his face. He opened his mouth to agree immediately, but then hesitated. It was 1997. He wasn't yet the esteemed professor he would one day become. He had no money at all. I smirked. I know you don't have the money right now, so write me an IOU. I already have paper and a pen ready for you. Standard interest, $10 per month. You can repay it over 3 years. Ethan's mother, who had always taken advantage of my family's generosity, tugged at his sleeve, hesitating now that she saw how cold and resolute I had become. In a hushed voice, she tried to persuade him. Son, if we give back that much money all at once, how will we survive? Listen to your mother. Maybe you should talk to Emma nicely first. Ethan had always looked down on my family, seeing us as mere opportunistic merchants. But in our past life, no matter how much he despised us, he had been forced to endure it because he owed us too much. Now, given this second chance, he clearly had no intention of lowering his head to me. Without hesitation, he grabbed the pen and started writing the IOU. Enough, Mom. Don't say another word. I've already applied for that fully funded study abroad program from the county. I'm confident I'll be selected. Once I return with my degree, this little bit of money they made through cheap business tricks won't mean anything to me. Beside him, Olivia Carter spoke softly, her voice filled with tenderness. Ethan, even if you're struggling financially now, I don't mind. Even if Emma holds a grudge and refuses to give you money, I believe in you. You're talented. You'll succeed no matter what. Her words moved Ethan so much that his eyes shimmered with emotion. With a triumphant look, he shoved the IOU toward me, lifting his chin. Fine, I'll pay it back. And let me tell you something, Emma Sullivan, I don't need you in my life. I'll do just fine without you. I took the IOU without hesitation, completely unmoved by his arrogance. My mind was already making plans. Back then, I had been interested in business, but Ethan had always dismissed it as nothing more than dishonest, greedy opportunism. He thought it was beneath him, and that it embarrassed him to be associated with someone like me. That was the only reason I had given up my ambitions and settled into a life of domesticity. But now, I had been reborn in an era where China's economy was booming with endless opportunities. This time, I would do what I wanted. This time, I would live for myself. Besides, how did Ethan think he got that study abroad opportunity in our past life? Without me pulling strings and running around to make connections, he never would have gotten it in the first place. Ethan wasted no time. The moment our engagement was annulled, he couldn't wait to marry Olivia. Unlike the pitiful wedding I had in my past life, where we had simply thrown a red cloth over our heads and called it done, this time, Ethan made sure to put on a grand display. Even though he had to borrow money, he still insisted on buying Olivia a proper wedding dress. He didn't skimp on the dowry gifts either. He made sure to include all the traditional 4 major items. The wedding procession paraded through the entire county before finally arriving at the old Hayes family house. I stood there watching the spectacle, lost in thought, until Mrs. Zhao, one of the older women in the neighborhood, clicked her tongue and spat on the ground. Ungrateful bastard, don't be fooled by how flashy he looks now. He's drowning in debt behind the scenes. He borrowed money from just about everyone he could, swearing he'd pay them back double once he gets that scholarship grant. Ha! Nothing's even certain yet, and he's already making promises. She turned to me and sighed. Emma, don't be sad. I'll introduce you to someone better. Sad? I didn't even have time to be sad. The next 20 years would be a golden era of economic growth in China. I had to seize this opportunity. I had to make money, serious money. Ethan Hayes? Lucas Hayes? Adam Hayes? It didn't matter who he was. I would have everything I wanted. At that thought, I handed over a bundle of goods and smiled. Thank you, Mrs. Zhao. Here, take a look. These are denim jeans. They're a huge hit down south. Pick a pair you like, I'll give you 20% off. My clothing store officially opens tomorrow. Bring the other ladies and help me spread the word. Mrs. Zhao's face lit up with delight, her eyes crinkling in excitement. But I never expected that later that night, while I was restocking my inventory, Ethan and Olivia would suddenly show up. Ethan scoffed as he looked around my small old shop. So, after all that effort, this is what you ended up with? A tiny rundown store? He shook his head dismissively before turning to Olivia. Forget it. See if there's a pair of jeans you like. I'll buy them for you. I rolled my eyes at him and didn't hold back. We only accept cash. No IOUs. Ethan's pride was immediately wounded. His voice rose as he snapped. Are you looking down on me? Olivia, pick whatever you want. I'll pay for it. Without looking up from my ledger, I mocked. Spending borrowed money really doesn't hurt, does it? But if I remember correctly, Olivia, isn't your dance school tuition due soon? The moment I mentioned it, Olivia's hand, which had been holding a pair of jeans, slowly lowered. She hesitated before glancing at Ethan. Ethan, the tuition fee is $100, and these jeans. Ethan, still full of bravado, immediately pulled out the money. If you like them, just buy them. Then he turned to me, his tone sharp. Emma, don't think that just because you have a little money now, you can make us bow down to you. Olivia isn't like you, covered in the stink of business. I didn't get angry. Instead, I smiled as I counted the cash, gave him the change, and neatly packed up the jeans. After all, who would refuse money? Well, except for Ethan. As they were about to leave, Ethan arrogantly knocked on my counter and smirked. Don't forget to attend the county meeting tomorrow. They'll be announcing my full scholarship for studying abroad. I'll be receiving a generous stipend. I can pay off my debt to you all at once. Open your eyes wide and watch. Without you, I'm still doing just fine. Sure, without me, you can still become a professor. But I didn't let my thoughts show. My expression remained indifferent as I simply nodded. The next day, Ethan dressed in his finest Zhongshan suit, brimming with confidence. Even government officials from the provincial capital were attending today's event. This was his moment to shine. For the past few months, rumors had spread about his broken engagement and his debts, making him a laughingstock. But today, he was finally going to prove himself. His mother had been bragging for weeks that her son was about to study abroad. She had even invited half the neighborhood to witness the moment and had pockets full of celebratory sweets, ready to hand them out. The townspeople were abuzz with admiration. I've lived so many years and have never even been to the provincial capital. But Ethan is going abroad at such a young age. He's really something. I heard that once he returns, he'll be teaching in the capital and working on scientific research. He might even end up on TV one day. Ethan, don't forget about us when you make it big. Just think, when people hear we're from the same town, we'll all bask in your glory. The endless flattery had Ethan completely puffed up. When he spotted me, he lifted his chin even higher. The next time we meet, you better address me as Professor Hayes. Just look at yourself, an opportunistic merchant selling cheap goods. How could you ever be worthy of someone like me? I didn't react with anger. Instead, I smiled and replied, Professor Hayes, show some respect. It's not called opportunistic trading anymore. It's called business. Ethan snorted, sneering, always full of excuses. Let me tell you something. From now on, no one will call me a heartless man. They'll only say that you, Emma Sullivan, were never good enough for me. The speeches dragged on for half an hour. Then, finally, came the most anticipated part, the announcement of those selected for the Overseas Scholarship Program. The names were read out one by one. Daniel Miller not selected, Jacob Reed not selected, Liam Hart selected. Hearing that name, Ethan's smile grew wider. In his past life, only he and this Liam Hart had been chosen. It looked like nothing had changed this time around either. Jonathan Wells, selected. Then came the final name. The entire hall fell silent as everyone turned to look at Ethan. He straightened his posture, smoothing his suit with pride. All he needed was to hear his name. Ethan was certain that, just like in his past life, he would soon be known as the highly respected Professor Hayes. The whispers and gossip about his debts and Olivia's tuition fees all of it would disappear. His future would be bright and successful. He had already taken half a step forward, his gaze sweeping over me with barely concealed contempt. But in the next second, the voice over the microphone announced, "Not selected." Ethan froze. His body stiffened in disbelief as his voice instinctively rose. "What?" The host, looking awkward, repeated, "Ethan Hayes not selected. I'm sorry, please take a seat." But Ethan didn't move. He remained frozen in place, unable to process what he had just heard. Eventually, it was his own mother, embarrassed by the scene, who grabbed him and forcibly pulled him back down into his chair. Ethan collapsed into the seat, his face as pale as a ghost. His entire body trembled, his lips moving as he kept mumbling, No, this isn't possible." As soon as the announcement ceremony ended, Ethan nearly stumbled in his rush to the front. He grabbed the former director in charge of admissions and without hesitation started interrogating him. "How is this possible? Why wasn't I selected? There had to be a mistake. I was supposed to be on the list. Did you do this on purpose? Are you getting back at me because we competed for the committee position in our past life?" He was gripping the director's sleeves so tightly that the fabric twisted out of shape. The man, clearly irritated by Ethan's accusations, took a deep breath and replied, "I have no idea what you're talking about. The selection process is based on academic performance. There was only one slot this year. Liam Hart scored 1 point higher than you, so naturally he was chosen. Ethan, you came in second. That's still impressive, just take it with a good attitude." But Ethan only spiraled further into madness. 1? Not 2? But in my past life, there were 2 slots. How can I stay calm? My entire future was riding on this. There's no way you didn't make a mistake. Check again. By now, even the former director was losing patience. Seeing how agitated Ethan was getting and unwilling to let the situation escalate, he signaled for security. The guards quickly escorted Ethan out of the building to let him cool off. Ethan was left standing at the entrance of the grand hall, barred from re-entering. His mother and the neighbors, too ashamed to be associated with him, had already slipped away. He was completely alone. He crouched in a corner, staring blankly at the official notice listing the scholarship recipients. His expression twisted between crying and laughing, his expensive Zhongshan suit now wrinkled and disheveled, his hair a mess from all the struggling. Gone was the dignified, self-righteous scholar he prided himself on being. I watched from a distance, waiting until his hysteria died down before stepping forward. My voice was calm as I asked, "Ethan, do you know why you got selected in our past life?" He flinched. Then, as if suddenly realizing something, he scrambled to his feet and stared at me, his eyes filled with shock. "In our past life, you." I shook my head and smiled, cutting him off. "No need to overthink. The truth is simple. That spot was never yours to begin with. I begged for it on your behalf." His expression darkened. "There was only ever one slot. Last time, I pleaded with the director to give you a chance because you had come in second. I even offered to pay your tuition out of pocket if necessary. I don't even remember how many people I begged, how many doors I knocked on, how many times I was turned away before they finally agreed." I let my words sink in before continuing, my voice steady. "Have you ever wondered why your scholarship money was always sent directly to you?" Ethan's face twisted with fury. "No. You're lying. That's ridiculous. I got in because of my own abilities. You interfering last time is the reason people accused me of pulling strings. If anything, you ruined my reputation." I looked at him, my expression calm. "The first month of your overseas scholarship grant was 800 yuan, which just so happened to be my entire life savings. The second month, you received 815 yuan. You always disapproved of me doing business, so how do you think I came up with that money? I carried coal for people. I collected scraps. I saved every penny I could." Before I could continue, Ethan suddenly snapped. "Shut up." His face contorted in anger as he clutched his head. "I don't want to hear it. Stop lying. You're making this up." His voice, once loud and filled with arrogance, was now shaky and uncertain. The more he denied it, the more hollow his words became. Deep down, Ethan knew the truth. During his years abroad, not once had he written to me, and yet, I knew every little detail. There was only one possible explanation. Everything I said was true, but he didn't want to believe it. "I kept it from you for the sake of your pride, Ethan, but tell me, what did I get in return?" When you came back from studying abroad, you looked at me, your so-called devoted wife, with nothing but disgust. My eyes, my nose, my entire presence seemed offensive to you. You resented the smell of business on me, resented that I wasn't educated enough. You wouldn't even let me step foot into your study. And in the end, when I fought so desperately to stay alive, you were the one who personally sent me to my death. My chest heaved violently as the grievances and bitterness of my past life swelled within me, blocking my breath. Unable to hold it in, the pain spilled from my eyes in silent tears. So, Ethan Hayes, this is all your own doing. You brought this upon yourself. I turned and walked away, not sparing him a second glance. I had only taken 2 steps when his arrogant voice rang out behind me. You think this will make me bow down to you? He scoffed. Don't fool yourself. Even without you, even if I don't become a professor, I'll still live a successful and fulfilling life. Olivia is beautiful and gentle, a trained dancer, and she even finished high school. She's 1,000 times better than you'll ever be. Just wait and see, Emma Sullivan, you'll never be good enough for me. I didn't bother responding. Let him talk. Let him believe whatever he wanted. Mrs. Zhao, the neighborhood elder, smiled as she approached me later that day. Emma, there's a young man I know from the government's publicity office. He's an honest and decent guy. If you're free this weekend, why don't you meet him? I shook my head and laughed, slipping a pair of socks into her shopping bag. Mrs. Zhao, my music store just opened, and I really don't have the time to think about these things right now. But thank you for looking out for me. You've always taken such good care of my business. These socks are newly imported from Guangzhou. Take a pair and let me know if they're comfortable. Mrs. Zhao clicked her tongue and tapped my forehead lightly. You, girl. But you know what? It's a good thing you never married that Ethan Hayes. If you had, there's no way you'd be doing this well now. She leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Do you even know what kind of mess he's in now? I raised an eyebrow, but before I could ask, she continued excitedly. After all that bragging, after dragging half the town to his announcement ceremony, he didn't even get selected. How embarrassing is that? And don't forget, he borrowed a lot of money under the promise that he was going abroad. She snorted. Now sure, he got assigned to an elementary school as a teacher and he makes 50 yuan a month, but with all those debts, who knows when he'll ever pay them off? Someone even tried to help him out by introducing him to a job, and guess what? He refused, said it was beneath him. Can you believe that? His pride is through the roof, even when he can barely afford to eat. I smirked. Really? Really? She leaned closer. That's why it's better to stay away from people like him. Thinks he's above everyone, when in reality, he's sinking. Just as she finished speaking, the door to my store creaked open. Ethan stepped in, his head slightly lowered, his expression unreadable. Without a word, he walked straight to the counter and knocked on it, his voice cold and commanding. Emma, step outside. I scoffed. And why would I do that? Do you think I'm still your unpaid maid, ready to jump at your every order? My tone was indifferent, and I didn't even look up from what I was doing. I'm busy running my store. If you have something to say it here. He clearly hadn't expected me to shut him down so directly. His face twitched, and after an awkward pause, he hesitated before pulling out a plastic bag from his briefcase. Inside was the pair of jeans he had bought for Olivia. Return these. I barely glanced at them before replying. No refunds. The tags are cut, and they've already been washed and worn. Ethan's jaw clenched. Why not? She barely wore them. Why won't you take them back? His eyes darkened with frustration. Emma, don't let your personal feelings get in the way of business. Just because you're bitter about me leaving you, doesn't mean you have to be petty about something like this. Before I could even respond, Mrs. Zhao slammed her palm on the counter, stepping in front of me. Ethan Hayes, do you have no shame? She scolded him without hesitation. Who tries to return worn clothes and demands a refund? Are you seriously trying to scam Emma out of money, and you dare say she's bitter over you? Pfft, she spat in disgust. You've got some nerve. Emma now owns 2 stores and is about to hit a 5-figure income. Do you know how many men are lining up just to have a chance with her? It's a damn good thing you dumped her. Otherwise, she would have been stuck dragging your sorry ass around for the rest of her life. Mrs. Zhao's voice carried through the store, and a few other customers turned their heads in interest. Ethan's face turned red, his hands tightening into fists. But Mrs. Zhao wasn't finished. With the neighborhood gossip growing louder, Ethan's face turned bright red with humiliation. Unable to bear it, he grabbed my arm and forcefully dragged me outside. Only when we reached the corner of the alley did he finally speak. "Emma? Fine. If you won't refund it, then at least pay Olivia's tuition fee for her." I let out a short, mocking laugh. "And why would I do that? Am I her mother?" Ethan, unbelievably, still had the audacity to lecture me. "Didn't you always give her money in our past life? Besides, she missed her dance school entrance exam back then because of you. Emma, this is your way of making amends." I rolled my eyes so hard it almost hurt. "First of all, in our past life, it was you who took money from our household to support her. The moment I dared to refuse, you'd throw a fit. I had no choice but to give in for the sake of our so-called family. Because of that, she drained us dry like a parasite. Second, her ankle injury had nothing to do with me. She fell on her own. The doctor even said there was nothing seriously wrong with her foot. And third," I sneered, "with how terrible her dancing was, do you honestly think she could have passed the entrance exam? Only someone as blind as you would believe she ever stood a chance." Ethan immediately jumped to Olivia's defense. "Stop making excuses and blaming her. Olivia was always one of the best in her class. She would have gotten in. She's nothing like you, obsessed with money. She's refined, cultured, and educated. She understands me. If it weren't for you, I would have been with her from the very start. At least in the end, she was willing to divorce her husband for me." I burst into laughter, finally unable to hold back. "Divorce? Are you seriously still buying that nonsense? Let me refresh your memory. Olivia went abroad because she met a wealthy foreign businessman. She was never married. She was his mistress. But when she got older and was no longer desirable, she had no one left and had to return. She only came crawling back to you because by then, you had made a name for yourself in China. And you? You actually believed her whole 'I sacrificed for you' sob story? Ethan, you are beyond stupid." Ethan's face turned purple with rage. I could tell he wanted to scream at me, but I didn't have the patience for his theatrics. All right. I won't argue with you anymore. But hey, this time, I didn't trip her, right? So why don't you have her take the dance exam again? Let's see what score she gets." I crossed my arms and smirked. "And since you think she's so noble, let's also see how devoted she is now that you have no money, no status, and no promising future." Ethan shoved the jeans back into his bag, his glare sharp as a blade. "You're full of it. Olivia isn't the kind of person you say she is. I'll prove it to you." I didn't know how, or from whom, Ethan managed to borrow money, but Olivia did end up taking the entrance exam. On the day the results were posted, I was busy at the wholesale clothing market, stocking up on new inventory. My business had expanded. I had just acquired a new 2-story shop, and things were going incredibly well. I barely had time to keep up with orders, let alone worry about Ethan and Olivia. But then, Mrs. Zhao's grandson came running into my store, panting as he tugged at my sleeve. "Emma, you have to come. Please help my mom. She's trying to break up a fight, but it's getting out of control." Even I almost got hurt. Mrs. Zhao worked for the Women's Federation and often mediated disputes between women in the community. When emotions ran high, it wasn't uncommon for things to get physical. Without hesitation, I dropped what I was doing and followed the boy. When we arrived, I was stunned to see who was fighting. Ethan's mother and Olivia. Mrs. Zhao was desperately holding Ethan's mother back, but the older woman was still struggling violently, pointing at Olivia and hurling insults. "You little fox, you're bleeding this family dry. Buying new clothes every day, who are you dressing up for? You don't bring in a single cent. You don't lift a finger to do housework, and you strut around this house like a queen. How the hell did my son end up marrying such a worthless woman?" Olivia's temper flared, and she snapped back. "That's his choice. And besides, I'm a dancer. A dancer's hands shouldn't be doing chores like washing clothes and cooking." Ethan's mother grew even angrier. She reached out and grabbed Olivia by the hair, yanking her hard. "He mortgaged the house to pay your tuition fees. And now you're telling me you didn't even pass the damn exam. How could you do this to my son, to our family?" Her voice dropped to a scathing hiss. "And if that wasn't bad enough, I caught you sneaking around with that foreigner down by the river, kissing him in the woods like some cheap floozy. How long were you planning on making my son wear that green hat, huh?" Olivia screamed and immediately started clawing at Ethan's mother's face with her nails. The two women were locked in a vicious brawl, pulling, scratching, screaming. It was pure chaos. "Stop them. Someone pull them apart." The commotion had drawn a crowd. By the time the police arrived, both women were disheveled, bruised, and panting from exertion. The officers managed to separate them, restoring a semblance of order. Ethan arrived just in time to see the spectacle unfold. Surrounded by neighbors gossiping and whispering, his face was a deep shade of shameful red. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth before finally exploding. "What the hell is wrong with you two? Do you have to humiliate me like this in front of everyone? How am I supposed to show my face after this?" Ethan's mother clung to him, sobbing as she wailed. "My son. Thank goodness you're here. This shameless woman, after I caught her cheating, was packing her things to leave. We went into debt just to marry her, and now she's found herself a rich man and wants to run off? Where's the justice in that?" Ethan didn't respond to his mother. Instead, his face darkened as he turned to Olivia, his voice cold and sharp. "Olivia, you told me you were staying late at school to practice, but when I went to ask your teachers, they told me you barely show up for class. You're always at the bottom of the rankings, and you've been getting close to some foreign guy. Meanwhile, the one actually placing first in every exam is your classmate, Jessica Wu. You've been lying to me this whole time, haven't you?" Olivia's face twisted in anger. "You were checking up on me? Answer me." Faced with Ethan's questioning, Olivia let out a bitter laugh, as if she had finally given up pretending. "Yeah, I lied." She lifted her chin defiantly. "Since you found out, I won't bother keeping up the act. Your mother was right. You were right. But none of this is my fault." Her tone turned mocking as she sneered at him. "You told me you were going to be a professor, that you'd study abroad, get a generous stipend, and come back with a bright future. That's why I stayed with you. But look at my life after marrying you. Sure, the wedding was grand, but all of it was borrowed money. Every month, when your paycheck comes in, the debt collectors are at our door, ready to take everything, even the pots and pans. I can't even remember the last time we ate a proper meal with meat in it. And now, you're so broke, you're trying to return the one new piece of clothing you bought me. You're just a pathetic broke man with nothing but useless pride. You have no future, no status, no ambition, and you expect me to struggle alongside you? I regret ever marrying you." Ethan's face paled as if he had been struck. His lips trembled as he looked at Olivia with desperate eyes. "But haven't I been good to you? I borrowed money to pay your tuition and living expenses. Olivia, I know things are hard now, but didn't you once say that none of this mattered? That you didn't care if I had money or not? You said we'd build a life together, that we'd work through it together." Olivia scoffed. "And you actually believed that crap?" She flicked her hair over her shoulder, her expression full of disdain. "Without money, how are you supposed to give me a good life? Listen up, I'm leaving in a few days. My new man is taking me to the US. He's a businessman. A real businessman. He owns factories in America. I suggest we file for divorce as soon as possible because I don't want any ties to you, Ethan Hayes." Without another word, Olivia shoved Ethan aside and strode toward the door. "You cheating!" Ethan's mother shrieked, her fury bubbling over as she pointed after Olivia's retreating figure. "You shameless tramp! You tricked my son into marrying you, buried us in debt, and now you think you can just walk away?" Her face contorted in rage as she clutched her chest, her breathing suddenly turning erratic. Within seconds she was gasping for air, her entire body going limp. She was having an asthma attack. Ethan panicked, shouting, "Mom!" He rushed forward. But it was me who grabbed her first, helping her down and steadying her breathing. Someone quickly called for a doctor. Minutes later, after she was stabilized, Ethan turned to me, his voice hoarse. "Emma. Thank you. If it weren't for you, my mother might have." I immediately raised my hand, cutting him off. If it were anyone else, I would have done the same. My tone was cool and detached. "Take care of your mother, Ethan. I have a store to run." I turned to leave, But Ethan's mother suddenly grabbed my wrist, her voice trembling. "Emma, this was all Olivia's fault. If it weren't for that wretched woman seducing my son, you two would have been married by now. They say you see a person's true heart in difficult times, and you are the one who truly cares." Her grip tightened. "I heard you haven't started dating anyone yet. Well, that's perfect. Let me make the decision, Ethan. Divorce that tramp and marry Emma." I almost laughed out loud. This woman was truly unbelievable. She had spent years belittling me, thinking I wasn't good enough for her precious son. And now, because her ideal daughter-in-law had turned out to be trash, she suddenly wanted me back in the picture? She actually thought I would still be willing to be with Ethan Hayes? Mrs. Zhao once joked that if I didn't dodge fast enough, Ethan's mother might literally throw him at me. It seemed that moment had arrived. Ethan stood frozen, clearly overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. Meanwhile, his mother kept talking. "Emma, I heard your business is doing great. Your shop is thriving. If you marry Ethan, we'd finally have some financial security. And maybe I can even help out at the counter." The audacity. I had to resist the urge to throw my abacus at her. My polite expression vanished in an instant. Any trace of sympathy I might have felt was gone. I yanked my hand from her grasp and said coldly, "Impossible." She blinked, startled. "What?" "I'm not married because I don't want to be married. It has nothing to do with Ethan. And as for him and me," I let out a sharp laugh, "we are never getting back together. I will never marry him in this lifetime. So you'd better give up that idea." I smiled, deliberately provoking Ethan's mother and Ethan himself. Besides, I don't marry divorced men. Their faces immediately turned ashen. Ethan's mother opened her mouth, but no words came out, while Ethan's expression darkened with suppressed fury. Seeing their reactions only made me feel incredibly satisfied. Lifting my chin slightly, I let out a small, mocking laugh before turning and walking away. But it seemed my rejection wasn't enough to make Ethan give up. The very next day, he showed up at the entrance of my music store, carrying a thermos. "I stopped by your clothing store, but you weren't there, so I figured you'd be here." He lifted the thermos. "I made some chicken soup. My mom said it turned out pretty well, so I brought you some to try." I didn't even glance at it. "Not interested. You can drink it yourself." "Emma, don't push me away," he pleaded. "Just think of it as me repaying a debt, a way to make up for all the mistakes I made in this life and the last." I looked at him coldly. "Repaying a debt? Don't make me laugh. After you became successful, you lost count of how many times you mocked me. You yourself once said, if it weren't for paying off a debt, why would I have ever married a woman like you, someone who only knows how to make money and never bothers to read books?" I crossed my arms. "If you really regret it, then do me a favor and get lost. As far away as possible. I don't want anything to do with you ever again. And don't worry, I wouldn't dare taint such a refined scholar with my so-called stench of business." Ethan's face flushed a deep red. He lowered his head, utterly humiliated. He didn't say anything for a long time, just stood there in silence. By the time I looked up again, he was gone. That evening, I turned to my assistant. "Next time he shows up, don't let him in." For the next few days, Ethan kept coming to my stores, trying to make his presence known, but I had already instructed my employees to block him at the door. A week later, he finally found a way to ambush me at the back entrance of my warehouse. The moment he saw me, he blurted out, "Emma, I'm sorry. I know I should have said this a long time ago." His voice was raw, filled with desperation. "I've always been too proud. You've seen me at my worst, and I hated it. That's why I kept putting you down, because I couldn't stand to face my own failures." His eyes were red as he continued, "But now I understand. You are the only one who ever truly cared for me. You ran our household, you raised my children, you gave up your own dreams for me." His voice cracked. "I was blind, Emma, so blind. But I see it now. It took me too long to realize, but I swear, I will treat you like a treasure from now on. I will make it up to you. Please, just give me a chance." Hearing this, I didn't feel satisfied. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt nothing. In that moment, I only regretted one thing, that I had ever wasted my love on this man. Looking at Ethan's still youthful face, I realized I no longer felt anger, hatred, or resentment. Just apathy. I met his gaze and spoke evenly. "I hear you, but I don't accept your apology." His breath hitched, his expression crumbling. "I can't forgive you, not for the last life, and not for this one," I continued. "In this life, I have wealth, beauty, and youth. But in my past life, I spent years bedridden with illness. Did you ever come to see me? Did you ever hold my hand? No, you left me to rot. 50 years of emotional neglect, and then at the very end, you cheated on me." I exhaled slowly, looking him straight in the eye. "Ethan, you weren't just proud, you were a coward. The only way you ever felt good about yourself was by stepping on me." His face paled, but I didn't stop. "You used to say, without me, you never would have had this life. But the truth is, without me, you are nothing." I pulled an envelope from my pocket and stuffed it into his hand. It was an invitation. "My grand restaurant opens tomorrow. Make sure to stop by," I told him, my lips curling into a smirk. "Open your eyes and take a good look at just how well I'm doing, without you." Ethan didn't show up the next day. Maybe he was lurking in the crowd, watching from afar. But I didn't care. I was too busy handling the grand opening, cutting the ribbon, greeting guests, and overseeing the cash registers. With the memories from my past life, I had mastered modern marketing tactics. Flash promotions, early bird discounts, free fruit samplings, every trick in the book. By the time night fell and I was tallying up the sales, one of my employees, little Zhu, suddenly leaned over and whispered, "Emma, did you hear? That teacher. Ethan Hayes, he got fired." The money in my hand froze. "He got fired? From his teaching job?" Little Zhu nodded and continued, "It was because of the house. Remember how he mortgaged it to pay for Olivia's tuition? Well, he never managed to pay back the loan, and the company he borrowed from wasn't exactly reputable. The interest kept piling up, worse than anyone expected. In the end, not only did he lose the house, but the debt kept growing, and he still couldn't pay it off." "But that wasn't even the worst part," little Zhu added. "The debt collectors actually showed up at his school, demanding their money. Even though what they did was illegal, the kids were terrified. Parents started filing complaints one after another, and before long, the school had no choice but to fire him." She sighed. "Now, everyone back home treats his family like they're cursed. The people he borrowed from, they chase him down and curse him every single day. Even the wedding gifts, the 4 major household items, were taken away to pay off his debts. And I heard his mother's asthma got worse. But they didn't even have the money for her treatment." I tied a bundle of cash together with a rubber band, barely looking up as I replied, "Is that so?" This time, I felt no sympathy. In my past life, when he ripped the oxygen mask off my face and let me die, did he ever think this day would come? Let go of the need to save others. Respect their fate. In this life, Ethan was simply reaping what he had sown. I looked at little Zhu and said, "From now on, you'll be the acting manager of the restaurant. The county's market is too small. I'll be heading to the provincial capital soon to explore new opportunities." Compared to our small town, the provincial capital was far more developed. The economy was booming, and while my clothing and music stores were successful in the county, they might not perform as well in a bigger city. But this was the 1990s. Ice skating rinks, karaoke bars, internet cafes, mobile phone shops, computer centers, entertainment venues, and bubble tea chains. These were the trends of the era. And just as I predicted, it didn't take long for my businesses to flourish. Step by step, I went from Miss Sullivan to Boss Sullivan, then President Sullivan, and finally, Entrepreneur Sullivan. As for Ethan, once I moved to the provincial capital, I barely heard anything about him. The only updates came from my parents when they visited our hometown. Occasionally, they'd mention him in passing, how he had ended up doing the very thing he once looked down on, selling toys in the streets. How his mother had fallen gravely ill and passed away. How he was constantly on the run from debt collectors. And how, in one unfortunate incident, he was hit by a car and left with a permanent limp. But the topic that always came up the most was me. The small-town girl who became a well-known entrepreneur, the woman who was featured in newspapers and on TV. People in my hometown took pride in knowing me, bragging that I was the one who funded the first asphalt road in the county. I never commented on it. Instead, I simply smiled and dressed my parents in the latest designer clothes and accessories. In my past life, I was a housewife, relying on Ethan to provide for me. I never had money to buy anything nice for my parents, let alone take care of them properly. But now I was rich, and I wanted to give them the best of everything. Emma, this jewelry is too much. I can't wear all of it, my mother said with a chuckle. My father laughed. Just wear it. It's from our daughter, after all. Besides, when we go back home, everyone will say, our Emma is successful. More than 20 years passed in the blink of an eye. Maybe it was because my life had been so good in this timeline that I had nearly forgotten about my past life entirely. That was until today, when I took my daughter back to our hometown to visit my parents. As we walked through the familiar streets, I saw a man pushing a cart filled with roasted sweet potatoes. There was something eerily familiar about him. Mom, when I'm at university, the cafeteria doesn't even sell roasted sweet potatoes. I've been craving them. My daughter grinned, tugging at my arm as we stopped by the cart. The vendor, an old man with graying hair and rough, calloused hands, hunched over as he carefully adjusted the fire in his cart. His worn-out cotton cap was caving in, his entire figure covered in a layer of dust and soot. It was Ethan Hayes. When our eyes met, he immediately looked uncomfortable. His fingers fumbled as he reached up to adjust his cap, as if trying to salvage a shred of dignity. Emma. Long time no see. Even now, he still called me by my old name. Before I could respond, my daughter happily picked out a few sweet potatoes. When I handed him the money, he refused to take it. It's on me, he mumbled. For the kid. As I was about to insist, I heard a voice calling from behind me. Emma? Emma? I turned around just in time to see my husband, Liam Hart, walking toward me, carrying a massive bouquet of flowers. With a bright smile, he opened the car door and jogged over to me. I had a business conference overseas, and it took longer than expected. I got off the plane and came straight here. I hope my beautiful wife won't be too mad at me. He leaned in and kissed my forehead. Happy anniversary, my love. I shook my head as I took the flowers from him. You didn't have to rush. It's just an ordinary day. Liam's eyes softened as he glanced at me, concern flickering beneath his tired expression. The dark circles under his eyes were obvious. Our daughter, standing beside us, playfully teased. Professor Hart, what are you doing? You two have been married for ages, and you're still being so mushy, Liam chuckled, feigning an exaggerated scowl. Hey, your mom will always be a young girl in my eyes. Then, reaching into his wallet, he pulled out a bill and placed it into Ethan's rough, calloused hands. $15 for 4, but I only have a 20. Keep the change, Liam said, his smile radiant with happiness. It's our wedding anniversary today. Let's all celebrate and enjoy the moment. People passing by couldn't help but whisper among themselves. This is what real love looks like. From youth to old age, still as affectionate as ever. Ethan's eyes reddened slightly at their words. Without sparing him another glance, the three of us turned and walked away. Liam wrapped an arm around my shoulder and placed the bag of sweet potatoes in my hands. Here, May, hold on to this. Let's go to the supermarket as a family. He turned to our daughter and grinned. You know, back when I made Coca-Cola chicken wings for your mom, she was absolutely shocked by how good they were. I shot him a playful glare. Liam, stop making things up. I was just surprised that a scholar like you knew how to cook. And what's wrong with that? He said with a proud smirk. Not only can I cook, but I can also handle a broom and a mop. His boyish confidence made me laugh, and as my gaze landed on the bouquet in his arms, I felt my heart warm. The vibrant petals, delicate and fresh, were carefully cradled in his embrace, cherished, protected, and treated with the utmost care. Just like how he had always treated me in this lifetime.